All right. Just get a little closer to the screen and jump into it. Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Barden here. Just a few quick things before I jump into it. You may notice, compared to where I normally am, I've got a different setup. I've got headphones on, just a single monitor so you can see all the stuff. Different mic setup, all that thing. I'm visiting family for the holidays. So that's why things are a little bit different right now. So just be aware of that. So one thing I'm going to be doing just throughout this video, again, because I'm visiting family, there's a lot of people kind of using the internet at once, and I don't have my normal hardwired Ethernet connection. So I'm going to be kind of just jumping in periodically back to this screen just to make sure that everything is working how it should be, because I've had several streams that have just decided to stop, and I wasn't aware of that until several minutes had passed by. That's a problem. So to avoid me doing this several times, again, I'm just gonna keep jumping back to this tab periodically just to make sure that it is still going. All right, so let's actually talk about the video stuff. So this video is going to be a slightly longer one covering several topics. My intention for this is this to be just a large video that people can just go back to, and there's just one link for several related topics. When I teach this, I'll usually break it up into 2 or 3 days just to give people plenty of time to work with it. So just be aware of that. If you can't tell from the video description here, basically I'm going to be talking about scales, musical keys, chords, chord progressions, and the like. In the description, there's going to be a link to some Google Slides, which I will be jumping to right now. Stay recording, YouTube. And that'll bring you to right here. So these are the slides. If you wanted to find your own copy of them, you can use them, do your own thing, and it's all, right there open for you to use. One thing to note, though, is that in these slides, I do not, or I should say I will not be playing any of the video samples that are linked right here. So just be aware of that. I don't want to deal with a bunch of copyrights. I'm going to be showing you some popular music examples of several chord progressions towards the end. So I highly recommend that you pull these up and you can at least get the links to the videos and find all of that. So that's there. I'm just going to jump through. It's just for my students, it's a quick review. I'm going to go over a bunch of stuff, but it's just going to be a, hey, remember this kind of a thing. So scales, specifically major scales, are what I'm just going to briefly touch on right now. Just any scale, though, is just a repeating pattern of notes. That's all a scale is. The major scale is one of the most commonly used ones, and its intervals within the scale. It's a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So if you pick any note on the keyboard, doesn't matter which one, or any note on whatever instrument you play, and play or sing or however those exact intervals, you're always going to play a major scale. Right? And I'm going to be referring back to the major scale throughout this video. There are several other scales. I've gone through several of those. I've got playlists and things like that you can check out on my channel if you want a quick review of those. But there are many more besides the major scale. However, I'm going to specifically be just keeping it to this scale, and things will kind of transfer throughout there, specifically with the minor scale. The major and minor scales are very related. So anything I say with the major scale will translate to the minor scale. Other ones, it's debatable. So let's just put a pin in that, though, and keep going. So I mentioned whole steps and half steps when I was talking about the major scale. If you're looking at a piano keyboard, this is the distance from one key to the very next key on that keyboard. It's the smallest physical distance you can play on a piano, and on most instruments, things like violins and trombones and stuff, you slide whistles, that kind of thing, you can get smaller intervals, but for most modern instruments, in Western music at least, that's kind of the smallest step. That's going to be the main building block that we use. A whole step is considered 2 half steps. So if you start on a C key, you go up 1 to C sharp, up another to D. The interval between C and D is a whole step, or a major second. All right? Notes that are 3 half steps apart are a minor third, and 4 steps is a major third. Okay, so just adding that in, we can get 5 half steps is a perfect fourth. 6 is what's called a tritone. Going on, we get perfect fifth, minor and major sixth, minor and major sevenths, all the way up to a perfect octave. So from C all the way to C, or D to D, or G sharp to G sharp, whatever note to the same note on the keyboard is called a perfect octave, or 12 half steps. So looking at that, we can make a chord. So a single note is just a note. So you play a note, there you go. If you play 2 notes at once, we think of that as an interval. So we have the 2 notes played at the same time. That's just an interval. It is a fourth, or a second, or a minor third. That's all it is. When you have 3 or more notes, that is a chord. And technically speaking, any 3 notes or more is a chord. We're going to be specifically talking about major and minor chords today. The reason for that is those are kind of the foundation for a lot of more advanced theory topics. I'm trying to keep this as broad for all of my students as possible. So again, we can take a chord and break it up and look at the individual intervals between the notes. So the most common intervals in most chords are a third. We can have other intervals, fourths, fifths, and so on. But most commonly, it is a third. So again, if we were to take this chord and kind of break it up, here you'll notice that I'm going to look specifically at this top portion. These notes up here that are all on spaces, these are all a third away. So we have C, D, E, F right here. So F, G would be on the space, A here, A, B would be on the space, C here. So again, we have this these 3 notes right here, all in thirds. You can usually tell them when looking at staff music, because notes that are a third apart, they're all going to be on lines, or they're all going to be on spaces. Whether or not that's a major or minor third depends on the accidentals here that we see. But again, they'll all be on a line or space if they're in this root position. If there were some words I mentioned that you're like, wait, what? We'll get to that in a little bit. But just something that you can visually look at. All right, let's go into making chords. But before I do that, I'm just going to make sure, is my connection still going? It appears as though my connection is still going. All right, last time it crept down to me like 3 minutes in, so let's just get back into making chords. So basically, you can go from a scale to a chord very easily. So right here, I've got a C major scale, and we're going to be building all of our chords here in thirds. So to pick a third, there's a few different ways to visualize it. One way I kind of do it is, so we've got the scale here, and you pick 1 note, skip a note in the scale, go to the next note. That's a third. So C to E is a third. E to G is a third. G to B is a third. A to F here is a third going down. You skip 1 note in the scale and go to the next one. This only works for major and minor scales. Other scales, it may not work. I don't know what you might be looking at, but I'm keeping that for major and minor scales for the whole video. Another way to think about it is pick 1 note here. That's 1. And then count up 2, 3, 4, 5, however, whatever you need. So if we want a third, we pick our note. That's 1, 2, 3. F to A is a third. So again, that's another way to look at it. Some chords you can do this and get and have a 4th code with a 7th. on it. So you would have like C, E, G, B, and B is a seventh above C, so we would call that a seventh chord. I'm not going to talk about seventh chords. That's a whole lecture in and of itself. But just know that they exist, and sometimes we hear them. I'm not going to talk about that right now. So looking at this here, again, we've got C, skip D to go to E, skip F to go to G, C, E, G. That would make a C, in this case, major chord. We could just do this starting on any note. So here's D, F, A. That would be a D, in this case, minor chord. E, G, B, and so on. We build chords up like that. If you're not looking at notated music, instead are looking at a keyboard, the same idea is there, but it can be a little more confusing, potentially. So you still need to pick a note. So let's say here we've got our D. You want to skip the next note in the scale to get to your third. So D, we're going to skip E, and we've got F. But because we aren't looking at the music, we need to figure out and think, is it going to be, an F natural, an F sharp? I don't know. It depends on the notes in the scale that you're using. So let's say you wanted a D major. We'd have D, skip the next note E. The next note in the scale is F sharp. So you have to go to F sharp. So D to F sharp is a major third, whereas D to F is a minor third. Remember, if you count those half steps, D up one to E to D sharp, E 2 to F is 3, that's the minor third, up a fourth, one more, that's the major third. So that's how we can build those intervals. So again, depending on the scale you're using, your intervals may be a little confusing. So just keep that in mind. Okay. So what are these notes? How do they make the chords? Cool, I'm still streaming. So I've got this diagram here that I'll refer back to. This is a C major chord. But we're going to be, again, building our notes using three main, building our chords using three main parts, three notes. The first one is the root of the chord. This is the main kind of home base, like a tree, the roots support the whole thing. So the root of the chord is the basis of that chord. So if someone says, play a G minor chord, you're going to play a minor chord starting on G. In this case here, we've got the root of C. We go up a third to E. We go up a third to G. And we'd be doing that again in the key of C major. The third, again, that's the next one up. This is probably the most important note in a chord like this. All right, this is what determines whether or not it is a major chord or a minor chord. Okay, so if the interval between the root and the third is a major third, then it's a major chord. If it is a minor third, it's a minor third. It's a minor chord. If it's something else, then that's not a major or minor chord. It's something else. But again, the interval between the root and the third tells you what kind of chord it is. All right. The last one is the fifth. All right, the perfect fifth between the root and this note. All right, this for a major or minor chord will always be the same. It's always going to be between C and G, a perfect fifth. And then somewhere in between is that E something. It may be an E, it may be an E flat, maybe something else. But that's generally how we build up chords. So these are general rules. Again, I've kind of talked a little ambiguously going through these bullet points, but generally speaking, for my classes, we'll use this as a strong guideline. And then if any students are writing music and want to change things, they can feel free to use this as a starting point and then adjust it for the music they want. But again, we have the root, the third, and the fifth making up a chord, and those are all named for that interval from the root. All right, identifying chords. This is going to be kind of the real meat and potatoes of this video, to use that expression, because it's a little bit of a process, especially until you get used to doing it. All right. So before I jump too into it, I've noticed in the diagram here, and how I've talked about it before, the root has always been the lowest pitch note of a chord. That is not always the case in music. A lot of times, or enough times that I should bring it up, I haven't counted every chord. That is not the case. You have different notes, in different orders. So yes, we're playing all three of these notes at once, but maybe we're changing the order. So maybe we'll move the C to be the one up above the G, or we'll change the E and make it lower. It just depends on the context of the music. So if the root is the lowest pitch note in your chord is what's called root position. This is kind of the most what's called stable position for a chord. It just exists when you play it. It doesn't want to move around any. If you make the third the lowest pitch of the chord, this is what's called first inversion. These chords are what's called less stable, meaning when you hear them in terms of a progression, it wants to resolve somewhere else. The intervals tend to lead the ear to wanting things to resolve and move to a different chord. Okay, it doesn't just exist as it is as a root position chord. Trees don't want to move, and then having the fifth on the bottom, that's called second inversion, and it's more unstable than the first. So second inversions really want to move, from one thing to another. And if you think about it, if you took a tree, unplanted it, and flipped it over, it's gonna want to fall. Okay, so as you hear those, you tend to want to hear them resolving somewhere. We usually, at least in my experience, see them in what's called a cadential figure, which is just a little chord progression for the end of a musical phrase. So we tend to hear, a second inversion chord going to something, and we eventually everything wants to lead us back to that home base chord. Again, I'm trying to keep things very broad here for the larger variety of people. So I've got this diagram right here. You can see the root, this C has been highlighted, but we're putting things in different inversions. So here's the C, but here's the C with that low E in the bass instead, and then the G. So these are all a C major chord. They're all perfectly valid, but just the pitch of the notes in the chord, the specific octaves, change a little bit of how it sounds. Okay, cool. I still have an excellent condition. Okay, so actually finding out what the chord is. So if you were to look, you might be thinking, if I look at music and I'm like, oh boy, there's a bunch of notes there, and they may not all be in this easy to find position. How do we figure out what the chord is? What is it? Well, the way I'll do it, and again, it could be different for everyone. This is how when I was learning, this is the process I would go through, is I would take my chord, and either on a separate piece of paper, like in the margins of a worksheet or something in class, I would write out all of the notes in the chord. All right. So if we had a C major chord, we'd write out, C, E, B, G, whatever the notes are in that chord. And then I would put them in an order, kind of an ascending order. So, I would say, okay, C, D, okay, C comes first, then E. So I put that in this order, ignoring the actual octave placement of the notes in the music. So they're all in an order. I would then look for the interval of the fifth. Again, that perfect fifth, it's always going to be the same no matter what you do. So if you can find the fifth, you can orient yourself once you've got that. So again, using the idea of C major again. So if I wrote down my notes and we had C and G, I would know, ooh, that's a fifth. So I would expect to find in my notes that I've written down also an E of some kind. So again, that would fit right in between these two notes. If it was something else, maybe we had, C, D, G, then we may not be looking at a major chord, or there may be extra notes added in. On the bass level, I'm keeping it to strictly chord tones. So there may be extra stuff, but if you usually find a fifth and then a third that fits in between it, you can kind of ignore that extra stuff if you're just identifying chords. So if I found that E, I would know, okay, so it's a C something chord. If it was an E natural, I'd know, okay, it's a C major, because C to E is 4 half steps. If it was an E flat, I'd know it'd be an E minor chord, because that's only the 3 half steps, or that minor third. From there, if I needed to tell the inversion of the chord, I could just look back at the music, see what that lowest pitch note in the chord was, and again, just remember that root, first and second inversion, it would just depend on what that note was. Okay, so that's that part. Let's talk about talking about chords. So when you're talking about chords in a musical context, there's specific, multiple ways actually, but specific ways to discuss exactly how they work. All right. So chords have kind of numeric designations based on that context of how they're being used. So these use Roman numerals in order to communicate 2 pieces of information at once. The first is, is it, what kind of chord is it? Is it major, minor, or one of the other ones? And then what note within that scale is the one that we're building this chord off of? So again, we'll pick the number, and we'll use Roman numerals for this. So a chord built on the first scale degree of a scale, that's going to be Roman numeral 1, a 1 chord. If it's built on the fourth, it'll be a 4 chord, and so on. And then the quality of it, if a chord is major, we'll use a capital Roman numeral. If it's a minor chord, we'll use a lowercase. And that's, again, called the quality of a chord, whether it's major, minor, or something else. So again, this is just kind of illustrating that. So again, your capital numbers are for major chords, lowercase are for minor chords, and the number itself corresponds to the scale degree of the root of that chord. Okay, for example, a G major chord is a major 5 chord. That's how you'd read that. If you're using a C scale, but it's a major 1 chord if you're in a G major scale. So just again, same chord, different names for different contexts. So here I've got this illustrated here. So this is a blues chord progression here. And we've got these notes here. This one is in C. But you can see here we've got the C major. In this case, they all have that 7th note added up to it. We can ignore that for this video. But again, so we've got the C. And since we're in the key or the scale of C major, this is the 1 chord. It's major, so it's a capital 1. Over here, we have an F chord, and it's an F major, so capital 4 right here. 5. Here we get the G major. Everything's good to go right there. It's C to G is a 5th. G, it's a major chord. Capital G or capital 5. Okay, musical keys and key signatures. Wonderful. I'm still going. Okay, so I've talked a lot about using scales and chords and things, but one way I like to think about it a little bit more than just scales is in keys. Okay, so if a song is using, mostly, it can use other ones, but a single scale, that scale is referred to as the song's key. So let's say that someone wants to play a song, and they say, hey, what key is that in? Oh, it's in B. B major, then that means that, mostly, at the very least, in its main structural areas, if not all the way through it, it's using notes from a B major scale. So you can use that to kind of help orient yourself. So if you know the particular key of a song, or at the very least the section of music you're looking at, managing the chords, the chord names and progressions is a lot easier because you know, oh, I'm in B. I'll use that as an example, and I want to, move my progression. So if I go to, up a fifth, oh, okay, I know that's F sharp, and I can build my chord. Oh, that's an F sharp major chord because I know how that works. So again, knowing what that is to start with is really helpful. Generally, a song will begin or end, or end in. It's more common for the end. That's almost always the case, but again, it can vary. We'll end with the major or minor root, tonic chord, the root chord, the one. Those are all different words for this kind of thing. Of course, so if a song's in C major, it will tend to end on a C major chord. So that's one thing you can look out for. You may also notice several 5-1 chord movements throughout the song. So a lot of, again, using the C example, a lot of G chords going to C chords. That's kind of a hint. This 5-1 movement will kind of tell you what the one is of that section. So another thing to look out for is that 5-1 movement. I've got the circle of fifths here just to kind of illustrate one, key signatures I'm going to talk about in a second, but also, what that 5 movement would be. So again, we have, G to C, E to A flat to D flat, stuff like that. So if it's moving from, from one note for one key area to the next, that's that 5-1 movement that you can kind of keep an eye out for. Okay, key signatures. So if you remember, scales are patterns of notes. Different scales have tons of different notes. A C major scale has very different notes than a B flat minor scale. In order to make it a little bit easier to read and write music, something was developed called a key signature. This is a symbol that gets placed at the beginning of that staff of music that tells you what the key is. What it's basically, these notes here are the ones that are sharp or flat in that example, in that piece of music. So looking at this one right here, C sharp and F sharp are going to just be sharp in the music. So they won't have these symbols in the music later on. It's just, you're going to expect that they are. So you'll be able to know, oh, we're in the key of D right here. Things like that. I'll talk about how to identify what these are on the next slide. But generally, it just condenses all of the normally used sharps and flats into a single symbol at the right behind the clef of the music. And here's a few examples. You can still have them in the music. It just depends on what you're doing. Okay, so some tips for identifying the key signatures. If there's no flats or sharps at all, it's usually the key of C major. If you look at a keyboard, C major has no sharps and flats in it. So there you go. Sometimes though, music may just not have a key signature and only have accidentals. So again, you may want to look and see. If you notice a lot of accidentals, it may not actually be in C major. The composer may have just not given it a key signature. For flat key signatures, I've got some right here on the slide as well. What you want to do is look at the second to last flat in the key signature, and that is the major key. So like right here, this one, we have 2 flats. So we move the second to last one, just reading left to right. So here we are, B flat. So this is the key signature for B flat and its relative minor. Over here, we've got this one. So the second to last, up here, this is a key signature for D flat and its relative minor. It gets a little tricky over here when we only have one. So B flat, but this one's B flat. So we have to go to the next one, which is over here, F flat. So, or F, I should say. So this is the key signature for F and its relative minor. For a sharp key signature, I think they're both kind of easy, but for me, I think it's a little bit easier to remember this. But look at your key signature, find the last sharp here. So this is D sharp, because it's sharp here. So D line, it's sharp, D sharp, and just go up 1/2 step to E. So this is a key signature for E major and its relative minor. That's how I was able to figure out that this one was D, outside of the fact that I've done this a lot. So again, the last sharp in the signature is for C sharp. Go up one note, then boom, D major and its relative minor. Just remember that the minors and major keys share a key signature, so you want to look at the key signature to get an idea, but you want to look at the actual musical content in order to be able to tell, oh, are we focusing on, C major or A minor? They're going to look and sound a little bit different. Okay, it looks like I'm still going, so that's always good to know. So we've talked about chords and scales and how to make them, what all the names are, what they do. And I want to talk about just chord progressions here. So progressions are important. Do I have it on this slide? Yes. So chords, just in general, they help support the harmony. All right, that's kind of their main function. But there's more than that. You can have one chord be the entire piece of music. However, depending on what you want to do, that may not be what you want. It's not going to be very energetic. It's not going to feel like it's moving. Moving from one chord to another gives music its kind of extra, well, I have it right here on the slide, motion and direction. We can feel it shifting from one area to another and back again. And you can tweak the chords and give music some little extra flavor. So again, the order that chords appear are just as important as the notes that make up the chords. So you could have, whatever you want, chord progression wise, but if it's in an order that doesn't really make sense or doesn't go anywhere, it's not really going to help your music. Right here, again, I've got this diagram. So if we're in the key of C, we've got E minor, F major, G major, and they're assorted names in the key of C. One thing I do want to point out that I realized I don't have right here, I'm just going to type it as I do, is that in a major key, there's a specific pattern of major and minor chords. So in a major key, the order of is, so we get a major chord followed by a minor chord, a minor chord. Then we get a major chord, minor chord, and a diminished chord. Actually, is there a button for that? No, I'm not going to worry about it. But so again, basically, if you're in any major key, the tonic, the root chord here, this is going to be a major chord unless you go in and change it. 2 and 3 are always going to be minor chords. So again, E to G is a minor third, G to B is, or E to B is a fifth, so that's a minor chord. In the key of C major, that's always 3 is always a minor chord, naturally speaking. 4 and 5 are always major chords. 6 is a minor chord, and 7 is what's called a diminished chord. I haven't talked about that, but that's one of the other ones. Basically that's just 2 minor thirds, so you don't get that perfect fifth. And that's why I haven't mentioned it. I just wanted to bring up that it exists because I mentioned it here. But just remember that you notice that E minor, F major, how, why. Well, when you're using all the notes in your home scale, it's going to naturally form this pattern of major and minor scales. So that's where that happens. Okay. So again, I'm not going to play these videos because YouTube will get angry at me. Something's beeping at me. But I'm just going to briefly talk about the progression. So here we have 1, 5, 6, 4. In the key of C major, this will be a 1 chord, or a C major, G major, A minor, F major. This is probably if not one of the most common chord progressions just used in pop music in general. If you play this video, you'll hear a bunch of songs that all use this same progression. So one of the more common ones. Over here, I've got 1, 4, 5, 1. You'll hear this a lot more in classical music than kind of popular music, but it's a very, very common progression. So again, it will move farther away from the root and then jump right back to it. If you were to kind of write out all the notes, you would kind of notice, we get, this one has 2 notes that are the same. This is 1, and then we're back to the 1. So it's, again, that motion from, far away and back of building those chord progressions. 2, 5, 1 here is very common in jazz music. And if you were to go back several slides to that circle of fifths, you'll notice that, okay, if I'm in the key of C, 2, 5, 1 is D, G, C. So again, that movement just down the circle of fifths kind of just gives it this never-ending moving style of chords. We never feel like it really resolves. So again, this is very useful in jazz. Over here, I've got the that 12-bar blues again. Very common in blues music, which is where it got its name. Sometimes I've heard it used a lot in jazz solos and things like that. Again, stuff is still beeping at me. I'm gonna have to wrap this up. Luckily, I'm almost done. And then the last one I have on this set of slides is just 1, 6, 4, 5. You'll hear this a lot in some kind of older music. I say older, from the the last century, 50s, 60s, give or take 10 years on each side. But it's really common in ballads and things like that. So it's got a nice little move to the minor chord, so it sounds a little ooh, leafy, and then it resolves into major chords. So it's a lot oh yay, happy. I realize I'm not actually playing any music, so I'm just doing my best to get through it. And because I'm not at my home studio, I don't have my musical keyboards to actually play these progressions. So what I'm going to do is when I get home, I'll make a short little addendum video to this that just has me playing through all the stuff. So again, just to wrap this up, as you build your own chord progressions using this and other information, there's no limit to the amount of chords you can have in a progression. It can be as many as you want. But I do want to leave you with a few tips to make your progressions sound good. I mentioned this a little bit before, but progressions, they tend to move from one chord to another. You want to have a progression to or from a home base, that the key of your music. Right, so you notice most of these started on or involved the one chord, either at the beginning or the end. Actually, they all do. Either at the beginning or the end have a one chord. That's the home base, the key for that song. So as you're listening to it, you can kind of feel it move away and come back. So, it'll give the music a sense of movement, a sense of progression. And how fast these chords change can increase or decrease that sense of movement. The last one is resolution. That's just looking at the notes in the chords themselves. You don't just want to willy-nilly pick some chords. You can, and it might sound good, but I can't guarantee that. But you want to have your chords to give a sense of completion or resolution to the musical phrase. So again, you want to have notes that you gradually get less and less common pitches with that one chord, then they want to resolve back to it. So things like a 5 chord or sometimes a 7 chord, they tend to want to resolve back to 1 naturally when people hear them. Just generally speaking, I don't know every person who may watch this video's ears, but generally speaking. So again, just think about that as you're going. I know I didn't give specific, this resolves to this and so on. I don't want to get bogged down in the music theory of it, because that's, again, several lectures worth of stuff, and it's a lot. If you want more info on chord progressions or some more examples of stuff, I've got a link here in the slides that will take you to this page. Before I go through that, it's still streaming, yay. But before we get into that, let's just go right here. So this is not like a sponsored anything or a shout out, but basically we kind of go through stuff. Several of the video examples I just pulled from here. But there's, talking about, scales and chords, and you can hear some progressions and the resolution and things that I've pulled from here. And then it goes through several of those popular chord progressions and the chords that make up those progressions. So again, that's pretty useful. So you can kind of scroll through this, find a bunch of different examples and things of that nature. And if you want to look into, specific genres of stuff, they have, you can look into stuff over here if that's relevant to what you're looking for. So you can definitely check that out. That's going to be me wrapping it up for now. It's the end of my slides. Again, this was a weird mix of in-depth and a general overview. So if you have any questions about stuff, feel free to put those in the comments. I love answering questions and, helping out the community, seeing what people do. But yeah, that's just about it. I just realized my camera was really high that whole time. I'm not going to fix it because I've been doing this for 40 minutes. All right, I'm getting distracted. I'm rambling now. If you enjoyed the video, if you learned something, give it a like, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. It's helpful. Comments if you got questions or just want to comment, and I'll see you all in the next one.